I might get in my car today, I might crash my car. So that's why I put my seatbelt on. So actually having a little momentary worry, better put my seatbelt on. Okay, I put my seatbelt on, carry on. The worry doesn't continue. It doesn't ruin my day. It doesn't stop me from doing anything. It doesn't make me feel particularly anxious. So that's okay. That's a kind of useful worrying thought. But if I did my seatbelt set off and then I spent the entire journey worrying about, I might crash my car, I'm going to be feeling pretty awful, pretty stressed out. And it's going to make me perversely slightly unsafer driver, potentially more likely to have an accident.
In this episode of You Are Not a Frog, we're talking about worry and anxiety, particularly rational worry and anxiety. You know the phrases, "Don't worry, it'll probably never happen," or "It's not like anyone's going to die." Well, what do we do when bad things may well happen? Or people's lives and livelihoods are genuinely at risk? How do we stop ourselves becoming overwhelmed with anxiety then? To explore this, we're joined by psychiatrist and therapist Dr. Caroline Walker, the joyful doctor, to talk about how to stop ourselves feeling overwhelmed with worry, even in the midst of worrying times. Even though we might not be able to control what's going on in the world, or even just our families or workplaces right now, one thing we do have more control over is how we deal with ourselves when we start feeling anxious or dwelling on unhelpful thoughts, even if they may be very rational. We can also stay focused on the present, where everything is okay at the moment. We talk about how worry can be helpful when it spurs us into action, but when it's overplayed, it can cause us distress and actually make the bad things more likely to happen, as we can't think straight or perform as well when we're in our sympathetic fight, flight, or freeze zone. We share some simple techniques you can use to reduce your anxiety, which you can use anywhere, even in difficult times. So listen to this episode if you want to find out why we need to be more gazelle, which emotions your anxiety may be masking and why this matters, and how to get yourself out of the vicious cycle of rumination and worry. Welcome to You Are Not a Frog, the podcast for doctors and other busy professionals who want to beat burnout and work happier. I'm Dr. Rachel Morris. I'm a GP now working as a coach, speaker and specialist in teaching resilience. Even before the coronavirus crisis, we were facing unprecedented levels of burnout. We have been described as frogs in a pan of slowly boiling water. We hardly noticed the extra long days becoming the norm and have got used to feeling stressed and exhausted. Let's face it, frogs generally only have two options: stay in the pan and be boiled alive, or jump out of the pan and leave. But you are not a frog, and that's where this podcast comes in. It is possible to craft your work and life so that you can thrive even in difficult circumstances. And if you're happier at work, you'll simply do a better job. In this podcast, I'll be inviting you inside the minds of friends, colleagues and experts, all who have an interesting take on this, so that together we can take back control and love what we do again. If you're a doctor who's feeling strung out and overwhelmed right now, and you want to find balance in your life, beat burnout and work happier, but find it almost impossible to find the time to make this happen, then let us help make it easier for you. Dr. Caroline Walker and I started the Permission to Thrive online CPD membership for doctors a year ago, giving overwhelmed doctors the tools they need to thrive in their work and lives. It's a wonderful community to be part of, and we're continuing this year with brand new content and loads more suggestions, coaching tips and resources to help you thrive, not just survive at work. We run monthly webinars with accompanying CPD coaching workbooks so that you can kill two birds with one stone, invest in yourself and claim CPD time. If you can't make the live webinars, you can access the recordings in our online resources centre, as well as other bonus content. If you want to find out more, then do sign up to a free webinar called How to Give Yourself Permission to Thrive on Wednesday the 19th of January at 8 p.m. And if you sign up and can't make it, we'll send you a recording. We'd love you to join us. Just sign up through the link in the show notes. Hello and welcome to another episode of the You Are Not a Frog podcast, and I'm delighted to have with me again Dr. Caroline Walker. Hi, Caroline, how are you doing?
Hi, Rachel. Oh, I'm well, thank you. It's lovely to see you. Thanks for having me back.
You're very welcome. And Caroline is a friend of the podcast. We have had her on several times before. We've done lots of podcasts together all around COVID, all around our reactions to COVID. And Caroline works as the joyful doctor. Caroline, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I am a doctor by background. I'm a psychiatrist and a therapist, and I specialise in the mental health and wellbeing of doctors and other healthcare professionals. So I set up the Joyful Doctor, which is a not-for-profit organisation, a few years back now, and everything we do just helps to improve the well-being of doctors and high-stress caring professionals. So yeah, it's just a joy to come on and to be working with you again, Rachel, to help reach some doctors and healthcare professionals out there who might be struggling a bit at the moment, because it is quite a challenging time still.
It is a difficult time, isn't it? And we're just sort of in the thick of Omicron and everything that brings us. And the reason why we're doing this episode is Caroline and I run a community, a CPD community for doctors called Permission to Thrive, where we do a webinar once a month. And in a recent webinar, we were looking at worry and anxiety. And actually, there were lots of things I thought would be really good to talk about on the podcast. And I think with everything that's going on in the world, there's a lot of worry and anxiety around. And some of the worry and anxiety techniques are just to sort of minimize what might happen. And that will help your worry. And that sort of got us thinking, well, what if the worst might happen? How do you stop yourself worrying when, actually things are bad? And we know with COVID at the moment, the numbers are baked in because of the amount of cases that we've got. Also, over the last few years, things have got worse than we probably could have imagined in some time. So actually things have got worse than we imagined. And lots of times I know that people use the technique of, well, let's think about it. It's not like anyone's going to die, is it? And actually, when you apply that to healthcare, well, you can't say that anymore and you can't minimize the impact of stuff. So when you've got lots of worries and anxieties, it feels actually it's almost right to do that. However, we can't live in a state of being crippled by anxiety. And I am getting lots of emails from people, lots of listeners who are saying about how worried and anxious they're feeling right now, and is there anything we can do to help, and what would we suggest? And so, I've got questions myself around it. So Caroline, I'd love you to share some of your wisdom, and I think we're going to talk about some of those things that we did talk about in the Permission to Thrive webinar, which I think have been helpful for people. So first of all, can I ask you, are we abnormal when we're feeling anxious and worried and ruminating, or is it just something that everybody does?
Absolutely not. We all worry, we all ruminate, and we particularly when there's lots of stuff going on like there is at the moment. I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? We've had 2 years of the pandemic. It's the middle of winter. Winter's always a tough time in healthcare. Always lots and lots of staff shortages, sicknesses, absences, and it's just that bit worse at the moment as well. So there's a lot going on for people, a lot of uncertainty still about what's going to come in the years ahead. So I think, no, completely normal part of being a human being to get worrying thoughts and to feel anxious. I think what becomes problematic is when those thoughts start to take over, they start to get in the way of your day-to-day life, they start to stop you being able to enjoy things and get on with things and still be productive. So it's about drawing that distinction between, normalizing. It's absolutely fine to worry and get anxious, we all do. But when is that becoming problematic? When is that becoming more of an issue for you, something that you might need to do something about?
What I have noticed is that a lot of people get very anxious about being anxious. So that tends to then exacerbate their anxiety.
Yeah, we call that meta worry about worrying, worry about worrying. It's really, really common. And it does just wind things up and up and up. But it's, again, like normal worries and anxieties, it can be helped with some simple techniques and strategies. And if those aren't working for you, again, seeking out some help and support to get some treatment around anxiety can be really, really helpful too.
Interesting. I've never heard of meta worry before. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Before we go on to talk about tips and techniques and strategies to help with our worry, is there any time where worry is actually helpful?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, I think often when we've got a problem that needs solving, we might need to think about it and think about ways around it. Worry tends to kind of activate us. It gets us out of a state of apathy and lack of motivation into a state of, I'm going to do something about this. So we might be worried about an exam coming up. We might sit down and do a revision timetable. We might sit down and actually do some revision. If you're worried about how you're going to get ready for going on holiday, you might actually get your suitcases out of the loft and start packing. So actually, yeah, worry in itself is not the enemy. It's not a bad thing. A little bit of like, oh, that thing needs doing. Okay, I should probably do that. Is very helpful, actually. And sometimes we genuinely have some real problems that it's completely normal and natural to be worried about. You know, if you've got a loved one who's ill or something serious going on in your life, maybe a relationship is in difficulty. Sometimes worry alerts us to a genuine issue that we actually need to pay attention to and spend some time thinking about. I think, though, that's the difference between that and when worry gets us all het up and anxious about things that aren't real or haven't happened yet. You know, like we did at the beginning of the pandemic. Rachel, you and I both shared when it first came along. You know, we were watching a 24-hour news cycle, and within minutes, we'd gone from thinking, oh my God, I might get COVID, to imagining our own funerals and, you know, how our families were going to cope without us. And so worry can kind of get out of hand quite quickly if we're not mindful around it.
And I think the key to stopping worrying when the worst might happen is that second phrase you said. You know, the first one is when it might not happen, fine. So let's not worry about stuff that might not happen. But actually, it's that hasn't happened yet. So yeah, it might happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And I think that's the mindset we find it really difficult to get into. And when you think about it, there's loads of things that are going to happen in life that haven't happened yet.
Yeah. So I might get in my car today. I might crash my car. So that's why I put my seatbelt on. Yeah. So actually having a little momentary worry, better put my seatbelt on. Okay, I put my seatbelt on, carry on. The worry doesn't continue. It doesn't ruin my day. It doesn't stop me from doing anything. It doesn't make me feel particularly anxious. So that's okay. That's a kind of useful worrying thought. But if I was then, you know, did my seatbelt set off and then I spent the entire journey worrying about, oh, I might crash my car, I might crash my car, I might crash my car, I'm going to be feeling pretty awful, pretty stressed out, pretty anxious. And it's going to make me, perversely, slightly unsafer driver, potentially more likely to have an accident. So I think it's about, you know, it's okay to predict what might be about to happen. You know, ultimately worry, anxiety keeps us safe, right? It's just our brain's way of trying to predict that something bad may or may not happen. How will we deal with that? But I think it's about going, okay, I've made a little plan for if that happens. Now I'm going to let go of whether it happens or not, because there's nothing we can do to control that, right? This is back to your zone of power. You know, there's relatively little in life that we do have control over. So if we can bring it back and focus on what we do have control over, then we're going to feel much more relaxed.
Yeah, and that's a really good tip, actually. Number one tip is use the zone of power. So people that have not heard about the zone of power before, it's simple. If you get a sheet of paper, draw a circle in the middle, that's your zone of power. Everything in the circle is things you can control, and then everything outside the circle is things that you can't control. And so when you start worrying, probably one of the first things you can do is literally draw that zone of power. What am I in control of here? What could I do? What can I do? Do that. And then everything outside that circle, like you said, things that we have absolutely no control over. I mean, the weather being one thing. So there's almost no point in worrying about the weather. Well, I guess there is. So you could worry about the weather. You're not going to change the weather, but you could change what you wear. Make sure you've got an umbrella, right?
And actually, there's a difference between worrying about something and caring about it. So I think it's okay to wish it was sunny when it's raining. It's okay to care whether the weather's nice or not. There's a difference in caring about it and worrying about it. So I think sometimes if we can acknowledge to ourselves, this terrible thing's going on at the moment, right? We've got this awful pandemic, we've got staff shortages, there's too much work, we're under-resourced, people are tired, anxious, uncertain about the future. All of that is real. And it's okay to feel a bit scared, a bit sad, any of those emotions that might be coming up for you, they're all okay. So acknowledge them, you know, allow a bit of space for them. Sometimes I find we worry and get anxious when actually there's another emotion going on that we're not paying attention to. And I think at the moment we're still grieving a lot. We're still quite sad about the loss of the life we were living, you know, the loss of our security and our ability to make plans and trust that they were going to happen. You know, I've had lots of conversations this week with doctors and healthcare workers who are, you know, maybe got a holiday coming up and they're still not quite sure if it's going to go ahead or not. And we've never had to live like that really before in our society. Some societies have, but we've been very fortunate, haven't we, to live a life where things have been pretty predictable, relatively secure. And that still isn't the case. And I think that leaves us feeling a bit unsettled. It leaves us feeling quite sad. And those are difficult emotions to sit with. So actually, it can sometimes be easier to then get worried, because worry is like an active emotion, right? It kind of gets us juiced up, it gets us active, that we can do something about it. We think we can do something about it. Often, as we've just alluded to, we can't, because it's not in our control.
And that's so helpful. That, yes, it's a lot easier for us to admit being worried about something than to be sad. And I think anger is very like that as well. I think sometimes if I feel undervalued or unappreciated or unloved, and I feel sad about that, I'll feel angry and it will come out as anger, not sadness, because sadness shows a lot of vulnerability, doesn't it?
Yeah. Or maybe if we're a bit embarrassed or a little bit ashamed about something. Like I get this around my parenting quite a lot. If I've missed something or not noticed something and then it's pointed out to me, I'm like, oh, cringe. So I'll start to worry and get anxious. And it's like, it's as I say, it's an easier emotion. I know it's not a pleasant emotion to be anxious and worried, but it's slightly easier, I think, than some of the others. So yeah. Sometimes it's worth thinking, is there something else going on here that I'm not allowing myself to feel or pay attention to?
And that's really helpful that there's a difference between caring and worrying, because I do struggle with this idea of, and we teach this, don't we, that everything outside your zone of power, just got to accept it. And it's really hard to accept it. And I think I've always thought that accepting it is just dismissing it, not caring.
No.
Actually, it's not that. It's, you can deeply care about it.
Absolutely. You can care about climate change, but also have an acceptance around the limits, around how much impact you might personally have around it. This is something I learned in my addiction recovery, actually, my own personal recovery around addictions, that, you know, we can care about the outcome of something, but still let go of it. You know, so if I ask somebody to do something for me, I can care about whether they say yes or no, but ultimately it's not my responsibility whether they say yes or no or not. It's not in my control whether they say yes or no or not. And if they say yes, brilliant, I'm going to be happy. If they say no, I'm going to be disappointed or sad or angry, or, you know, those other emotions will come up. So yeah, we can still care about stuff, but let go of the outcome.
Yeah. And that's so important, because as you were saying with the driving, if you were driving along, you would care. You care about the fact you're going to have an accident or not, right? Nobody wants to have an accident. But if you're worried about it, conversely, the worry does the exact opposite of what it should do. That the bit of worry to start off with, helpful, seatbelt goes on. But the more you worry, the more anxious you get, you go into your fight, flight or freeze zone. You've got adrenaline racing around you in your sympathetic zone. You can't think straight. You're much more likely to crash.
And this is where something like a worry tree can be very helpful. So this is where you might ask yourself a simple question, like, is this a real problem? Yes or no? If it's a real problem, great, you go down the problem solving route. So if I get in my car, I say, oh, I might crash my car. Is that a real problem? Yeah, I might crash my car. Kind of real. What can I do about that? I'll put my seatbelt on. Okay. So I've taken action. I've kind of addressed the worry. If the answer is this a real problem? No, it's not a real problem. Then you're looking at other techniques like worry time. That can be quite helpful. So that's where you would set aside a time of the day or a time in the week when you're going to specifically worry about things. It might sound a bit strange and a bit silly, but it really does work for a lot of people. And what that does is it acknowledges this is something I want to worry about. It's worrying to me. It means something to me. I do want to give it some time and attention, but I don't want to let it take over my day. So I'm going to plan at, say, 6:00 tonight for 20 minutes. That's my worry time. That's when I'm going to think about it. And then when you get to 6:00, you can worry as much as you like for those 20 minutes. Yeah. And often what happens when you get there is actually you're not that worried about it anymore. And sometimes you are, but you've got your 20 minutes worry time. It hasn't ruined your whole day. It just manages your worry. So this is one of those techniques which says, you know, worrying's normal. Let's accept it's going to happen. Let's kind of take a little bit of control and manage it, manage how we're going to worry.
Yeah, I think that worry time technique is really helpful. I've used that myself. I've found that it's more helpful for those long-term chronic worries. So say if you're going through a complaints process or something with a GMC, so that's going to be going on for a couple of years. Or you've got worries around one of your children, there's something that they're going through, because those worries are just constantly with you and putting those those times into, right, well, I will worry about it, but then, and I do find that then you get to then you think, well, actually, I don't need to worry about it now, but then it'll come back the next day. So that is really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you might get a totally different perspective on it at a different time of day, or something will have changed between when you were going to worry about it and then that has helped you to move on with it. Yeah, it's a helpful strategy. It doesn't work for everybody, but definitely worth giving a try if you're someone that struggles with repeated worries.
Yeah, I think you can adapt that for the middle of the night as well. And lots of people keep a notepad by their bed. So if they wake up in the middle of the night, like the middle of the night is pretty much the worst time to do worry time, isn't it? Like, don't even go there. It's like we have a Sunday night rule in our family. We're not allowed to have any discussions about relationships or anything deep on a Sunday night, because I'm awful on a Sunday night. I'm like, the world is terrible.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, no, it's just Sunday night. So nothing deep, just watch something silly on telly on a Sunday night. That's fine. And it's like that at 3 a.m. Do not schedule your worry at 3 a.m. No. If you can, write it on a pad next to your bed. Say, I am going to worry about this, but tomorrow afternoon. And 9 times out of 10, you'll get to tomorrow afternoon, you think, what was I thinking of? I heard a podcast from someone, actually. She was a gastroenterologist, and she'd looked at the gut-brain connection, and she thought about stress. And she said, often she wakes at 3 a.m, and she's trained herself to think, not what's bothering me, what am I worried about, but, what have I eaten that's causing me to feel a bit anxious and worried? She said often a cup of peppermint tea makes her feel a lot better, settles her gut down, and suddenly she's not worried anymore. So we often feel anxious, and then our brains look around for the thing that's making us feel anxious.
Yeah. And that's a great example of something we call attentional refocusing. You're basically just trying to switch your attention onto something else that's more helpful. And you can do that in lots of ways. You know, you could have your favorite teddy bear next to you that you decide to give a good hug to and look at and talk to. You could think through, what was the best thing that happened to me today? Or if it was a really bad day, what's the best thing that happened to me last year? Or, you know, but basically just switching, deliberately asking your brain to focus on something else, because essentially all worry is a type of thinking, isn't it? If we can switch to a different type of thinking, we're going to feel less worried. So asking your brain different questions. What went well today? What am I looking forward to? Those sorts of things can also be quite helpful. And then there's always the lovely effort bucket. I won't use the full swear word version for the podcast, but you know, if you've got something that's just going around your head, try visualizing, just taking it out of your head, or literally write it on a piece of paper, crumple it up and put it in the effort bucket, literally put it in the bin. You know, because some thoughts and worries are just not worth our time and effort. And that can be quite powerful.
There is something very powerful about that. I think one of our very, very first guests on the podcast was John C. Parkin, who has written a book called Effort. And it's such a nice man. It was such a good episode. So people might want to go back and listen to that. And in fact, I'm rereading his book at the moment, because I'm thinking, how does effort work after a pandemic? So obviously that book was written quite a few years ago. But it's exactly like you said earlier, and he says in the book, it doesn't mean we don't care about these issues.
No. And the more I work with anxious doctors and healthcare professionals, and the more I get to know my own anxiety, the more I believe that there is often something else going on for us. When we're particularly anxious, there's often another emotion or another thing going on in our lives that we're not quite paying attention to. And I think at the moment, we're all trying not to feel anxious about something that is going to make us feel anxious, right? There's this massive pandemic. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of overwhelm. And I actually think it's really normal to be a bit worried about that. But maybe we're not paying so much attention to the other emotions that it's bringing up for us. You know, the sadness, the loss, the anger, because they're not emotions that we're typically used to sharing publicly, are they? And we don't often see many examples of people role modeling how to do anger in a healthy way, or how to be sad in a healthy way that isn't, you know, uncomfortable for the people around you. So I think it's about allowing yourself to just check in. Is there other stuff going on here too? You know, what am I feeling sad about right now? What am I maybe angry about right now? And just paying attention to those things as well probably have a really good knock-on impact on your level of worry and anxiety.
Yeah, something happened with one of my children the other day, and I just felt dreadful about it. And I remembered what we'd been talking about with this whole let yourself feel the emotion, and I was really sad. I was really sad about it. And I sat there and I said, right, I'm going to let myself feel sad. And I felt really sad. And then I was reading the F it books and I was like, okay, well, F it, because there is literally, I've done everything I can
Yeah.
do
Yeah. You felt
and
the
I'm
feeling.
feeling sad
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
can't do anything about the outcome.
Yeah.
And just, it doesn't stop me feeling sad, but I think before I would be trying to get rid of that sadness feeling,
Yes,
doing everything to
exactly.
get rid of that sadness, and I
Exactly.
couldn't.
That just makes it last longer, right? So the thing about feelings is they all pass. Nobody has ever had a feeling that's lasted forever, right? They always pass. Always, always, always. So if we can learn to just invite them in and say, hello, I notice you're there. I notice I'm feeling sad today, or I'm feeling angry today, or I'm feeling this today. It's okay. It's not going to kill me. It's not going to do any major lasting damage. It's not comfortable, but that's okay. I'm gonna, and then actually, if we name what the actual feelings are a bit more accurately, I think it gives us a better chance to soothe ourselves. Because, like you said, if you're sad, you're going to let yourself be sad. You might have a cry, you might have a nice cup of tea with a friend, you might go and get a hug from your partner, or you might wrap up in a cozy blanket and watch a sad movie. That's going to be more useful to you than sitting there worrying for an hour and a half over and over, scrolling on Google or trying to find the answer to the problem. Yeah. If you're angry, if you can get that out in a healthy way, you can punch a pillow or write an angry letter that you don't send, that kind of thing. You can get that anger out. That's going to be a much more effective way of managing your feelings and helping them to pass more quickly than, again, spending an hour and a half worrying and scrolling on Facebook.
Do you think that part of the problem is that as doctors and some other professionals, we are used to being able to fix stuff? And then when we can't fix stuff, it really irks us, but our brains are still in there. Well, I can fix this if I just think about it and worry about it for long enough.
Yeah, I think we are still sold the myth, aren't we, that things are fixable when they're not. And so it's very difficult when we come across things that aren't fixable, things that just have to be sat with, or, answers that we might never get to the bottom of. I think we find it very, very difficult not to be able to fix things. It's natural to want to be able to fix them. Of course, we don't want to sit there and be sad or be angry or be this or that. And I was talking to somebody the other day actually about how often it is as doctors, we're the ones that, if a friend comes to us and tells us a problem, our first response usually is to try to help, isn't it? It's to try to give a solution, or to say, oh, have you tried this or have you tried that? Or, and I was talking to somebody about coaching and the difference there if you work with a coach, and how they won't necessarily offer you solutions, they'll help you to come up with your own, and how that's quite a hard thing to do as a doctor, because we're used to kind of stepping in, aren't we, with a protocol or a, like follow steps A, B, C. If A is plus B, then you do D or whatever. We work that, our brains work in that way, don't they? And actually, we're not often taught how to just sit with something, how to for it to just be okay that actually it's a bit rubbish right now. It's a bit sad, or it's a bit, uncertain. I was thinking at this time of year, especially, it's very much like a planning time of year, isn't it? It's January, everybody's thinking about their New Year's resolutions. How am I going to get fit? How am I going to get on top of my finances? How am I going to change my job? Finally get my life sorted. This is the year. And actually, how hard it is to resist that, and to just be like, no, actually, I'm not going to entertain the idea I might make any changes. I might just be, actually, just feel what I'm feeling, go about my day-to-day life, feel what comes up, and not try to change it. Really rare that we're given that role modeling, or that permission to do that.
I think it is getting a little bit more in the zeitgeist, that sort of thing about self-acceptance and stuff. And I talk about this book pretty much every podcast at the moment, the book 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman.
Oh, I just finished it because you recommended it to me. I loved it. So good.
Wasn't it good? And for me, guy who used to be he is a productivity time management guru, who's now realised that the only way to do it is to accept that we're never going to get everything done that we want to get done, and just go F it, really,
Yeah, and really prioritise actually what is the most important stuff. And this is what the pandemic did for us, isn't it? Gave us permission to stop and go, oh, crikey, we are mortal. We can't do everything. We can't take everything for granted. Maybe, what is most important? And are we covering, we're going to talk about that, but can't we, I think, in our next webinar with the Permission to Thrive group. I can't wait to do that, because I think, more and more for me, like goal setting and thinking about the life I want is more about how can I live that life today? not necessarily always focused in, this time next year or 5 years' time or 10 years' time. But yeah, how can we make the most of our precious time that we have today?
It's living a good life, even when things aren't perfect, even when there are things to worry about. And
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's interesting, we're talking here about how you stop worrying when the worst might happen.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, even when the worst might happen, I think there are still lots of very unhelpful stories that we're telling ourselves, which
Mm-hmm.
which makes the worry worse. And we talk a lot about being gazelle, don't we? Be more gazelle. And this concept, it was told to me by a good friend of mine, Eleanor, who's a mindfulness teacher. And she said, oh, Rach, you just got to be more gazelle. And, when a gazelle is eating grass and a lion comes along, well, it runs away, doesn't it? And then when the lion's gone, what does the gazelle do? Back to eating the grass. Now, that wouldn't be me. If that was me, I'd be like, oh my gosh, did you see the lion? And look at its hair. And what if it comes back tonight and eats my babies? And what am I going to do? And I've got that presentation tomorrow. And if I don't sleep, well, it's going to go bad. And if it goes badly, I'll lose my job. And then blah, and then blah. And we're constantly pre-living stuff that absolutely hasn't happened. Even if it might be true, we're experiencing the pain of it in the present, even though it's in the future. And there's a lovely quote by Mark Twain. I'm sure I've talked about this on the podcast before. I'm an old man. I've known many troubles, but most of them never happened. And we're suffering now for something that may or may not happen in the future, purely because of the stories we're telling ourselves in our head, which then puts us into that adrenaline worry zone as if it had actually happened.
Yeah. But we're not gazelles, are we? We have these annoying brains that click in with those extra worrying thoughts, the worrying about what if, worrying about the future, things like you say that haven't happened yet. If we can catch that, we can realize that's what we're doing. Then we have a choice. We can actually choose, am I going to continue to keep worrying about this thing that hasn't happened yet? Or am I going to kind of focus on what I do know is true? Actually, the lion's gone. I'm safe. I'm okay. I can sit down and enjoy my meal. I think this speaks to why it's so hard as doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals to stop for breaks. Because actually, when we stop for a break, I think our minds are still going at 150 million miles an hour in threat mode. So much. And it's really hard for us to switch straight back down into a relaxed parasympathetic mode where, our thoughts are more calm and, it's really, really hard. It's like that time when you turn off the fan and it just keeps spinning for a bit before it slows down slowly. It's like that. So, you take a 5-minute break, you might just be starting to slow your thoughts down when you're back up into the threat zone again. Or you might just spend your whole 5-minute break worrying, oh, I've got to do this, 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 and this, and this. And you're sitting there almost like jittering, unable to relax. And so I think it's really important that we start to practice being more gazelle, practice getting our brains into that relaxed state. And you can do that with simple, small exercises like breathing exercises, mindfulness exercises, just starting very, very small, a couple of seconds at a time, couple of deep breaths at a time, but just training your body and your brain to switch between on and off mode, between sympathetic and parasympathetic mode. And if you can start to do that in your time off a bit more when it's a bit easier, it will start to feed through into your working time as well.
That's really important. We always talk about the pause button as well, don't we? So when you have been triggered, like the gazelle, the lion's there, you run away. Gazelle then sort of stops. And often we then, in our fight, flight or freeze zone, react really badly to stuff and make mistakes and do things we regret. Dr. Steve Peters calls that your inner chimp, doesn't he? In the chimp paradox. And because of the stories we're telling ourselves, and I think we've noticed that there are lots of stories that doctors and other professionals tend to tell themselves. There are the stories like, if I don't do this, somebody might die, there might be a big mistake, and in which case you obviously need to take action. But there are the other stories that cause a lot of worry and anxiety. Things like, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
They'll think badly of me. I should, I ought. If I don't, who will? Or I have to. I think it's those types of stories that cause as much distress, or maybe even more than those other types of big stories. Would you say? in your work that you do and you see with people?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think 80-90% of the stuff we worry about isn't, actual real worry. If we go back to the worry tree, most of it isn't real life right now problems. Most of it is what if, and it's threats to things like our sense of self, our security, our fear of judgment from others, those sorts of things. And they're rife amongst doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals. We want to be thought well of. We want to be appreciated. We want to do a good job. And the thought of doing anything less than that is really, really hard for us. It's very easy for us to mind read and get it wrong, right? To assume that someone thinks badly of us or to catastrophize. It's going to be the worst day ever or the worst outcome ever. I think the key, again, is if you can catch it happening, then you've got a choice. You can press pause. So I'd always start there. Start trying to become a little bit more mindful about the story that's going on in your head and use that phrase. I mean, that phrase has turned my life around, Rachel. I don't know about you, but it's Brené Brown, I think, isn't it, that first talked about it in her book, Daring Greatly, or one of her first books around sort of vulnerability and shame. She talks about use the words, the story in my head is. So it's not I'm a useless mother. It's the story in my head is I'm a useless mother. Okay, because then it just decenters you from it a little bit, makes it something that might not be true. Right? That you can start to just gently challenge. And it's interesting you mentioned about them making mistakes and people dying, because you shared with me something I found quite helpful, was that quote from the lady in Australia, was it, who said about we will make mistakes. I will
you
make
are
mistakes.
going to make mistakes,
Yeah.
and some of them will be serious.
Yes.
Dr. Annalene Weston.
Yeah. Yes, because that, I think it's really important that we don't go the other way and say, no, of course you're not going to make a mistake. No one's going to die. It's absolutely fine. Everything's going to be fine. It's going to be perfect. Because we don't know that, do we? I mean, if we're very lucky, it might go that way. But we know in life there will be good and bad things that happen. So actually having something that acknowledges, yeah, I might make mistakes actually, and some of them are going to be serious. Generally, I'm doing all right. I'm doing an okay job. Most of the time I'm helping people. Most of the time I'm getting things right. And yeah, remembering what we are doing well, what is going well.
In my experience, the mistakes and stuff that we worry about the most never happen. And actually, it's the stuff that you don't worry about comes and hits you sideways. I mean, right, side note, a bit of a silly story, but I was in an exercise class as one of these HIIT classes on Monday evening. And I was just coming to the end of this sort of 9-minute HIIT, high intensity thing on a treadmill. I fell off the treadmill. It was awful. I was just putting it down to walking, having been sprinting. I just misstepped.
Yeah.
And I fell off. I grabbed hold of it. The treadmill shushed me to the back of it. I was holding on for dear life because I thought if I let go, it was going to fling me across the room. The bloke next to me grabbed my arm. The other woman on the other side was going, ah! The treadmill wouldn't stop. I skinned my knees. It's just awful. Now, if you'd asked me what would I worry about doing those classes, it's probably, hurting my back, pulling a muscle. I would never have worried about falling off the treadmill. Now, this is a really simple, silly example, but
it's so true though. It's true of parenting, it's true of being a doctor. We worry about making mistakes, but we end up making a mistake we didn't see coming.
Definitely.
And we end up with our parenting messing up our kids in a way we didn't see coming, right? We spend all this time trying not to. And actually the mistakes, what percentage of mistakes did we see coming? Yes, some. Looking back with hindsight, there are some warning signs. I mean, most of us are practicing as safely as we can, aren't we? Most of us are doing the best we possibly can to reduce risk and to not make mistakes. It's really important that we don't lose sight of that, that we remember that we're good people, trying to help others, doing a good job. And the thing about worrying that I hate the most is it takes us away from that. It takes our attention, it takes our time, it fills our day with negativity, and it takes our eye off the ball. Just look at all those nurses and doctors out there now, and all of you listening to this now, you are doing a phenomenal job. You really are doing an extraordinarily good job. And we're incredibly grateful to every single one of you.
Totally. And it's really interesting when you said most mistakes you can't predict, because I think I can predict the mistakes, and the mistakes that I make is when I am in my worry zone, that fight, flight or freeze zone, that sympathetic zone when your amygdala kicks in, and we call that being backed into the corner. And that's why the pause button is so important, and those techniques to get yourself out and check the story in your head. Because if you go into situations knowing that you are in that zone, you are more likely to encounter issues, which is why we're talking about this, because it's really important, not just for people to feel better, but actually for you to be effective as a professional, right? And have good relationships and practice safely.
Yeah, and feel a little bit better, because right now there's enough going on that's tough, isn't there? It would be nice if we could just be a bit kinder to ourselves, just feel a bit more relaxed and recognise all the good things we're doing.
So we've talked about loads and loads of different things, Caroline. If I was to pin you down to your 3 top tips for how to stop worrying when there is a lot to worry about, what would they be? Of everything you've said, what do you tend to find is the most effective for your clients and doctors and people?
Yeah, and for me as well, right? I think, number one, I remind myself that worrying is completely normal and it's okay. Not all worrying is bad, because sometimes that just takes the sting out of it. And it's like, okay, yeah, I'll worry about that for a little bit and problem solve it and move on. Number 2, I think it's about noticing it, starting to notice those stories in your head. If you can start to notice when you're getting into that worried state, when you're getting stuck in it, then you have a choice, right? And then I'd say press pause, number 3. Because there's a million and one things you can do once you've done all those things, but unless you can actually notice you're doing it, press pause and give yourself the opportunity to change how you're thinking or what you're about to do, you can't really do anything. So worry is normal. Try and notice the stories you're telling yourself in your head and press pause.
And I think the things that I find helpful as well is stay within your zone of power. Literally, what can you control? What can't you control? And then take action within that zone of power. There was a book called The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris, and he talks about choosing which thoughts you fuse with. And for me, just identifying those thoughts I've got and distancing myself rather than saying, I'm thinking I'm noticing I'm having the thought that.
Yeah.
It's like identifying the story in your head, and then you can just let that thought go like a cloud. You don't have to fuse with it. And you could use maybe worry time to worry about that later if you want to. And then I really like the F it bucket, or just saying, actually, I'm just going to let that go. Does it really matter? Or even if it does matter, there's nothing I can do about it. And I'll worry about it when the time comes to worry about it there. And that can just be really helpful as well. Yeah. So we know that, people are struggling at the moment, and it's really normal to worry, and worrying about worrying can make things even worse. So if anyone is really struggling, Caroline, where can people go to get some more help if they need it?
Yeah, so if you're trying a lot of these techniques and they're not really helping because for whatever reason, then please do seek out some professional support. You can speak with your GP, you give your doctor in England, Scotland, you can come to practitioner health, you can self-refer for mental health and treatment and advice and support. I think it's just about talking to somebody. So just take that first step. If there's a trusted somebody, a friend, a family member, just somebody, a colleague, or even get in touch with Rachel or I if you're not quite sure where you need signposting to, then please do get in contact with us and we'd be happy to signpost you further.
Yeah, please do. Please get some help. Don't struggle on alone. I think it's very brave to ask for help, so please do that. If anyone has any questions or queries or wants us to discuss certain topics on the podcast, do get in touch. Do drop us an email and we can jump on again and record episodes about various different aspects of this, because I think there's a lot more to dig into. Caroline and I are running a webinar on the 19th of January at 8:00 if anyone is interested. All about how to give yourself permission to thrive. And we'll be, I think, talking about in more detail about those concepts that you mentioned earlier, Caroline, about, actually a bit more self-compassion, a bit more self-acceptance, which will just enable us to thrive right here where we are without having to change everything about our worlds. And that's really, really important. So if you'd like to join us, please do. The link will be in the show notes. Caroline, if people want to get hold of you, how can they contact you?
They can contact me through the website, joyfuldoctor.com, or email us on teamjoy@joyfuldoctor.com. Happy to hear from you anytime.
Yeah, so great. And so all the links of the books and things we've talked about are in the show notes. If you want to join us for the free webinar, do sign up. And Caroline, we'll have you back again soon if that's okay.
Oh, I'd love to come back always. I'm a big frog fan.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And we'll speak soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please share it with your friends and colleagues. Please subscribe to my You Are Not a Frog email list and subscribe to the podcast. And if you have enjoyed it, then please leave me a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. So keep well, everyone. You're doing a great job. You got this.